This is the European History Backup Lecture for Monday, the 21st of September, 2020. Okay. So, what makes a dark age? Had you had me for ancient history, you would know this. You've had other people, so let's hear what you've learned. What makes for a dark age? I'm just going to pick someone now. Yes?
A lack of known history and art.
A lack of known history and art from the period that we look back upon? Okay, that's not a bad answer.
I was going to say the same.
Okay. I'm going to explain the process to you. And the process should give you a hint of how one comes about and what makes it a distinct type of event. Here's my definition. You should write it down. A dark age is a time when, you at home, make sure to check in. A time when the skills and knowledge of civilization, a time when the skills and knowledge of civilization are forgotten over generations of time, because they are no longer relevant. A time when the skills and knowledge of civilization are forgotten over generations of time because they are no longer relevant. Here in my classroom, I've got a sculpture of Lucius Verus, the partner of Marcus Aurelius in empire, the one who invaded Parthia and died of the plague. While Aurelius was the serious one, he was the playboy. I don't have him up there because he was a particularly important emperor. I don't wish him ill, but he wasn't significant in the manner that historically significant people are, in that they changed the world. So why do I have him up there? This is a beautiful and really, really good sculpture. I've seen it, or I've seen sculptures like it, of Pax Romana emperors. Now, I can tell you, beards of this fluffy kind are not easy to convey in marble. And yet that sculpture, which you can't see on camera on either view, that sculpture makes his hair and his beard look fluffy. That may be Lucius Verus on his best day, a glamour shots version of him, but it is still recognizably him. The sculptor's art reached a high point with that sculpture and other sculptures that are contemporaneous with it and that are equivalent in skill. That took, bless you, generations. It took centuries. The associated knowledge of generations of stonemasons, marble cutters, and sculptors were built upon and built upon and built upon. The sculptor who did that stood on the shoulders of giants, as the saying goes. Just as you can't really credit Einstein or Newton for the totality of their discoveries in physics, because they also stood on the shoulders of giants. They benefited from centuries of scientific knowledge accumulated in such a way that they were able to have an insight that changed everything. So what happens to cause a dark age? This is significant because today we are closer to a dark age than we've been in a very long time. We have been since the First World War, but the likelihood increases as our dependency upon technology increases. Today, sunspots could blank out the world's banking system. A few nukes that wouldn't damage the environment too badly would be enough to wipe out our electronic systems globally through electromagnetic pulse. 100 years ago, we depended upon mechanical instrumentalities, steam engines, some electric power, but mostly people did for themselves or they used mechanical equipment. Today, we depend upon global trade and electronic equipment. And if the power goes out, we are in serious trouble. A couple of years ago, to my horror, I advocated a first strike against North Korea. Because at that time, this was before President Trump met with Kim Jong-un. At that time, it seemed like Kim Jong-un's entire missile program was designed to do one thing: not to hit the United States, but to plant nuclear devices in a position to electromagnetic pulse the mainland of the United States. Were that to happen, our power grid would be out possibly for years. Tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of lives would end prematurely as a result of that. And if he was planning such a first strike, that would be grounds for war. And I understand history. I know people who fought in Korea. Another war in Korea would be awful. That's how serious I was at that moment. Things pulled back from the brink. But we are so dependent upon technology now that if anything were to happen long term to the power grid, our money would be at risk because it's no longer gold in a vault. It's information in a computer. Our ability to heat our homes and cool them, our ability to power our devices, our ability to travel because cars are computerized these days, our ability to get food because all of that is shipped by truck, our ability to survive. It's not like we're back in George Washington's time where everyone has access to local family farmers and local food. Our cities are too big. The more you complicate the pipes, the easier it is to plug up the drain. So, with that lovely, cheerful thought in mind, here's what happened to that level of sculpture. That level of sculpture comes from largely peace in the Greco-Roman world since basically the time of Alexander. The civil wars between the Romans up until this point hadn't materially damaged their ability to be civilized. But after him, after whoever sculpted that, the crisis of the 3rd century happened. Depending upon where that sculptor was in the empire, perhaps money was no longer worth anything because money was just a veneer of precious metal over a plug of base metal. Maybe he was back in a barter situation. What certainly happened after the revival of the Roman Empire under the Dominate and then its fall to the German and Gothic barbarians is that we were back in a barter situation. In a barter situation, that level of skill is completely unsupportable and completely unnecessary. If our exchange is limited to, I've got chickens and eggs, you've got a pig I want, let's do a trade. How many chickens or how many eggs is that sculpture worth? How many chickens or how many eggs is the knowledge of literature, of science, even of engineering and of construction worth? How much is the knowledge of history worth? Every advanced profession dies because it no longer can put meat on the table. The children of people who had that level of sculpting skill would be reverting, if they survived, to farming and pastoral ranching. They might learn how to be stonecutters. They might learn how to make blocks. They might learn how to split finished stone from Roman cities that were being adapted to make fortresses because they deconstructed their cities to build new forts and castles. And they weren't the kind of elaborate castles we associate with the Middle Ages. But they would have no need to go through the years or probably decades of training that it took to become so supple that you can make hard marble seem as supple as skin, that dimples, and as fluffy as hair. That knowledge is no longer relevant to survival. The sons would learn part of it to be stonecutters. The grandsons might learn a little bit of it. The great grandsons would hear legends of great grandpapa who carved stone. Here are some of his relics. Now go break rocks. The skills and knowledge of an advanced civilization are no longer relevant to the survival of families. Because they're no longer relevant, they wither and die. A dark age, a true dark age, takes generations to happen. Because it takes time for the old who have the old skills to wither and die. And it takes time for the new people to grow up being educated in more practical matters like how to clean a sheep's sty or a pigsty or a sheep's pen. Does anyone not comprehend this? Does anyone not agree with my analysis or not understand what I am saying about a dark age? A dark age does not happen in one fell swoop. It didn't happen when the Goths sacked Rome, didn't happen even when the Vandals sacked Rome. It happened over generations of time, where simply the knowledge of the advances of Greece and Rome were completely meaningless to the Europeans. I see no hands. So let's look at three lights of civilization that survive in and around Europe into this dark age that happens as a result of the fall of Western Empire. Number one, there is the vestige of Rome in Byzantium. The Eastern Roman Empire still exists. And for a while, it's still dynamic and strong. But when Islam comes and takes the majority of its territories, when its resources, already limited, were stretched to try to reconquer Italy and Spain under Justinian, the Byzantines were always exhausted. Even in their early phase, they were the remnant of Rome. The Byzantines always had population problems. Since the plagues of the 3rd century, the Romans always had population problems. Whether it was because, as I said, the men were simply less virile, or because of lead poisoning, or because of whatever. The Byzantines struggled to match the manpower of their enemies to the west and to the east and to the north and even to the south, across the sea. The Byzantines routinely continued the late Roman practice of bringing foreign troops in to serve in their armies. The Byzantines did have a first-class navy, and they had an amazing invention that we still don't really know how to make, called Greek fire, like an early version of napalm. But we don't know how to make it. We think it involved naphtha and oil, but just like Roman concrete, the formula has been lost and has not been recovered. No, we do not know everything in our age. So the Byzantines are holding on. Holding on for 1,000 years, they hold on. At first to the whole Eastern Empire, then to a bit of the Western, as well as the Eastern Empire. And then when the Muslims come to Asia Minor beyond the Kilikid Gates and the Balkans in Europe. And then hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of slow consumption by their enemies all around. The Byzantines never have a time of expansion and growth and dynamism. The closest they come is the brief reign of Justinian and his wife Theodora. But it doesn't last, and it's not able to be followed up on. What do the Byzantines do for us, for our Western civilization? Well, let's talk about the second light of civilization that affects us, and I'll explain once I do that. In the 600s AD, in the 7th century, in a caravan town called Mecca, a man is born who comes home like Abraham one day and says, God spoke to me. And like Abraham, his insistence on talking about God speaking to him caused consternation among most of his neighbors. In so many words, Muhammad says that God has been trying to get through to us primitive screwballs for a very long time. He tried with the Jews, but the Jews confused God's law with the living God himself. Stirek one! So God sends the prophet, Jesus of Nazareth, to clarify things and re-emphasize the living power of God over the law. But the Christians screw it up by confusticating a prophet with the Messiah. Stirek two! God is going to try one more time, and definitely there is the implication, one last time, to get through to us before he replicates what he did in Noah's time, but this time with fire. So God speaks in one voice to one man, the prophet Muhammad. This matters. Jesus of Nazareth spoke Aramaic. The Bible is in Hebrew and Greek, not Aramaic. There are a handful of phrases like when Jesus says to the young girl, "Arise, maiden," after healing her, Talitha Kuni, that is from the Aramaic. But in general terms, the words of Jesus Christ are translated to the Greek, but that's not the only translation. Jesus didn't write a holy book. Jesus may have been illiterate. What likely happened, may have been, I don't know. What likely happened, in fact, what did happen, is the sermons of the apostles were taken down by 4 evangelists. These evangelists are credited to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all come from St. Peter's sermons. So they have similarities that are great. They're called synoptic gospels. They all basically tell similar stories in similar fashions, but they tell them in a different order with different emphases. For example, Matthew's gospel is relevant because he's trying to convince the Jews that Jesus is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. So much of what Matthew does is he connects Jesus' life to the words of the Jewish prophets from Abraham all the way through John the Baptist. Mark tells the basic Petrine story. Luke emphasizes the mercy of Jesus because Luke is a physician. He's a medical doctor. Luke emphasizes Jesus' interaction, caring for, and mercy towards women and slaves who were basically property. In those days, women didn't matter and slaves didn't matter. Women were basically aspects of a family run by men, and slaves were property. But Jesus spent time both with women and with men. Jesus spent time with prostitutes and criminals, tax collectors, and other scum-sucking pigs. I don't know why I said it that way. So Luke emphasizes the mercy element of Jesus in those stories. The Gospel of John is totally different. The Gospel of John tells stories not of Jesus in the north, but in the south. And it is basically how Jesus is not a Gnostic. Gnosticism is a belief that was fashionable in the late antique world, whereby a person through meditation can achieve gnosis, and gnosis is direct interaction with God by opening one's own mind's eye. John was very clear that Christianity is not a Gnostic cult. It's something else. In any event, the story of Jesus is told elliptically. It's told indirectly. It's told by other people after the fact in another language. One of the things that makes Muhammad different from Jesus is that the Quran is written by one man in one voice in one language. If you convert to Islam, you are expected to try to learn enough Arabic, enough antique Arabic, Arabic from the 7th century AD, in order to read the Quran as it was written. Christians are not expected to do that. Christians have the Bible, which, as I just told you, are a bunch of indirect stories in another language translated into their own language. But there is a literalness to the story of the Prophet Muhammad. because single voice, single language that you as a believer are expected to learn. There are some other differences between Muhammad's revelation and the story of Christ. Christ was a teacher and a preacher and a healer. Muhammad was a warrior and a king and a judge. In addition to being religious, both of them had these very different aspects. The only time it's recorded that Jesus gets truly angry is at the money changers who are in the temple of the court of the Gentiles, where he whips them and turns over their tables and shouts, "You've taken my father's house and turned it into a den of thieves." No one died. Muhammad has to flee Mecca because Muhammad's revelation is disturbing business, because part of Mecca's business is the Kaaba, a secret holy cavern that's a tourist spot, where the Meccan pagans believe that all the gods of all the people of all the world have summer homes, and therefore that anyone can speak to their native god by going to the Kaaba and praying. If they had T-shirts, they'd have a T-shirt that said, "I went to Mecca and I went to the Kaaba and all I got was this stupid T-shirt." The Meccan pagans made a lot of money off the Kaaba, and Muhammad's notion of a one God, one all-powerful God, all compassionate, all merciful, but quite retributive too, threatens this. So Muhammad is driven out. It's called Hijra. It means the flight from Mecca. And that is the beginning of the Islamic calendar. We are in an Islamic year that's somewhere in the 1400s, because it is 1400 and some odd years after Muhammad has to flee Mecca. Muhammad comes to Medina, marries a wealthy widow, becomes chief citizen, and turns Medina into the first Muslim community. It is the first community that has mosques, which are Islamic houses of worship. Allahu Akbar! God is great! Thus says the prayer singer, the Muzayin, who makes the call to prayer from tower minarets constructed on the edge of mosques, towers that you usually have to climb up in a ladder. It takes courage to be a Muzayin. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. That is the equivalent of the Lord is God, the Lord is one to the Hebrews. That is the equivalent to, and God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son to die for our sins that we might have life eternal, which is the statement of Christianity summarized into a single statement. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. When Muhammad turns the men of Medina, the city he fled to, into a new army, he sends it south. Mecca is conquered. Mecca is cleansed. God cleanses the Kaaba with his own holy presence. And so God touches the world at Mecca uniquely twice. First, to communicate to Muhammad. Secondly, to cleanse the Kaaba. To this day, Muslim men from everywhere in the world are expected once in their life to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca during the high holy month of Ramadan, and to go to the Kaaba, which is covered by a square black building. A square, so you can see it. If you ever look up Mecca and see images, you'll see swirls of people around this black cube that is covering the entrance to the Kaaba. Islam, like Judaism, is a highly lawful religion. Muslims are expected to pray facing Mecca several times per day. Like Jews, Muslims are expected to keep halal. Jews have kosher. You're not expected to eat the meat of the pig, and there are other restrictions on how you eat, how you prepare food, how you drink, how you live. Jews and Muslims hold these laws in common. Muslims acknowledge that Jews and Christians are both people who worship the same God they do, but they worship him wrong. You can decide how better or worse that is. I can tell you the Muslims are not thrilled with Jews and Christians. Now, Mecca is given a unique fate. Usually when Muslims conquer an area, they allow non-believers who aren't pagan, forget the pagans, they're gone, but they allow non-believers to become Muslims. So the people of Mecca are invited to become Muslims and join the jihad. Jihad is Islamic holy war. We'll get back to that. Islam itself is a word that means submission to God. There are modern people who are trying to be PC and can fustigate things by saying Islam means peace. No, it means submission to God. It implies that it is the peace one gets by submitting fully to God. Muslims, in addition to praying 6 times a day facing Mecca, in addition to eating and keeping halal in their personal habits, are expected to engage in jihad. Now, jihad, which means holy war, Islamic holy war, can take many forms. There is the self-struggle of jihad. If you eat too much, or if you smoke, or if you don't exercise enough? What if you're sharp-tongued with the people around you? You're sarcastic and nasty, and you hurt people's feelings. Those are all things that one can engage in self-struggle with. The word jihad literally means struggle. So it can be the struggle to reform and improve your life. Jihad can also be waged within your relationships, an attempt to try to ease and make more healthy the relationships that people live in. But jihad traditionally and historically means holy war. Muhammad practices it for the rest of his life. Oh, the other choices of the people of Mecca, if they don't join Islam, are to die right now or to go out into the desert and try to survive until they get somewhere else. Now that's unique to Mecca. No infidels near Mecca because it's the holy city. However, in most places that Muslims conquer, they allow Jews and Christians to live in peace under their rule as kuffar or kafir. Kuffar or kafir, depending upon your pronunciation, your translation of the Arabic, means unbeliever, means infidel. Now, what that means is that Jews and Christians can live as second-class citizens under Islamic rule. They pay pretty much double taxes. They have far fewer rights. In fact, any Muslim man that comes into conflict with a non-Muslim in a Muslim society is going to win. It's like today under the People's Republic of China. It doesn't matter the situation. If a foreigner, a Lao Wai, is involved in a conflict with a native-born mainland Chinese, the mainland Chinese is always assumed to be right by the courts. That's the way it is for Muslims under Sharia law. But if a Muslim wants to take a Christian or a Jew to the slave market, all he has to do is put his arm on the Christian or Jew's shoulder and drag him to the slave market. So your legal status under Islam is problematical. Muhammad spends the rest of his life conquering all of Arabia, a land so destitute of resources that every self-respecting ancient empire had its borders going around Arabia rather than into it. In the time of Muhammad's sons-in-law, the Islamic armies surged in jihad out of Arabia and conquered the Persian Empire about as quickly as Alexander the Great did. The Romans had failed to come to grips with Persia for hundreds of years by this point. But Muhammad's sons-in-law and his family and his followers, which include the warriors of Arabia, unified by faith and into one army, conquers all of the Persian Empire. In the time of Muhammad's grandchildren, Islamic armies conquer Christian Syria, Christian Palestine, Christian Egypt, Christian Cyrenaica, Libya, Tunisia in modern terms, Algeria in modern terms, and Morocco, as well as Spain, Portugal, and even sent an army into northwest France. That's in the time of Muhammad's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They build what is up to that time the largest land empire in human history. How is it that they are so successful? Well, 2 reasons. First off, in the initial jihad conquests, the Arabs come from a physically tougher environment than anyone they fight. The Arabian desert is one of the worst places on earth in terms of easy living. They don't have an ounce of body fat. They don't have an ounce of water fat. These guys are tough. They are used to pain. They are used to functioning through pain. It doesn't matter. So physically, they are tougher than any. They're not big and strong like a bodybuilder. They're little wiry guys, but they're tough as nails. And physically, they can outfight anyone they're going to meet. But that's not the only reason. There's another reason. To become Shaheed means to be a martyr in a holy war. Shaheed in a jihad means that you are saved. It doesn't matter what your sins are, they will be forgiven. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. You will go to paradise, but not just any place in paradise. Paradise has many neighborhoods, has many wings, has many rooms. This is the part of paradise designed for heterosexual young men from the desert. It is a garden of delights with fountains and pools that you can drink and swim in, and sweetmeats and incense. And the Lord God Almighty Himself gives you 72 virgins to pleasure you throughout eternity. Now, nowhere in Jewish or Christian ideology is God going to give any guy who dies in battle a bunch of sex kittens to play with, but in Islam, the promise is there. So, if your life is not working out so well, which everyone goes through phases where they're depressed or where they realize that their life has reached what seems to be a dead end and they get desperate, what this means is that at any given time, up to a fifth of the Islamic army is ready to fight and die now, today, for victory that they will never see. If you have a fifth of your army ready to fight and die right here, right now, to achieve a victory they will never see, you're going to be able to do things with your army that most people can't. It will win you a lot of battles. And so that willingness to fight and die right here, right now, for a victory they will never see, plus their desert toughness, builds them an empire that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Himalaya mountains. From here to beyond this map. But it's a light of civilization. It's a light of civilization because it preserves the Persian knowledge that it conquers. It preserves the Greco-Roman knowledge in the Byzantine lands of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Cyrenaica, Libya, Tunisia, and so forth that it conquers. It preserves that knowledge and builds on it. To the point where 1,000 years ago, the most civilized place on earth by far wasn't China. China was divided and going through a low phase. It wasn't India. India also divided, going through a fairly low period. And it wasn't Europe. Our cultural ancestors in Europe were like the third world of that time period. Most of us lived in mud huts. We had thatched roofs, dirt floors, and we slept beside our animals, and we bathed once or twice a year when we fell into the stream, whether we needed it or not. And if someone got sick, the most high-order medical techniques there were said you slice the person open where their veins near their skin, and you stick leeches on them to suck out the evil humors. It was Islam, the Islamic world. This is why we have words like zenith, which means the top of the top. It's why many of our visible stars are named Rigel, Al-Hayna, Alioth, Aldebaran, which are all Arabic names. The Arabs had clean cities. They had running water. They had universities. They're going to lose this. But in the Dark Ages, they are a light of civilization. And Europe basks indirectly in the glow because Europe is on the receiving end of Islamic jihad. By the way, Christian crusades aren't invented until about 450 years into the jihad period. It took Christians 450 years to adopt holy war as a way of being. The third light of civilization is the church, which we'll get to next time. Now, do you have any questions about what I have just covered this early Monday morning? Oh, you know what gets rid of the Islamic zenith? The Mongols. The Mongols take the eastern third of the Islamic world and destroy its cities, destroy its libraries, brutalize its people, and it's like a traumatic head wound and they never really recover. The other reason why they don't recover, I mean, the Mongols were 800, 700, 600 years ago. They don't recover because today Islam is beset by fundamentalism. And fundamentalist Muslims make anyone who has creative thoughts very nervous. And if you can't accept creative new thoughts, you don't have a first-class intellectual life. You have to be willing to put up with people who say bizarre, foolish, obscene things in order to have a first-class intellectual life. Because if you don't allow that, you don't allow genuine creativity. And no Islamic society on this earth, except for Turkey between the 1920s and the 1990s, and Iran between the 1960s and the 1970s, allowed that. With the exception of those two times, modern Islamic societies take people who think new thoughts and punish them. And thus, there's a retardation in the intellectual life of many in the Islamic world, built out of fear. Please clear your desks of everything. I am going to shut the video off and the feed off so that we can do the quiz for today.